It, what's going on here? Hello, greetings, Aquaba. Welcome. We hope you are well this Sunday or whichever day it is when you're watching this. We welcome you to this week's episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And our topic today, the Central Intelligence Agency and its lies to damage Che Guevara's legacy. October 8th, 1967 is the day that the CIA controlled thugs in Bolivia captured Che Guevara in the canyons there in the rural areas of Bolivia, and they executed him on the orders of the Central Intelligence Agency. But after that happened, they of course learned that Che was, because of his principled example in life, was much more of a threat to them dead than he could have ever been alive. And there's no question about that because his legacy has grown since that time. Even though he has been dead going on 60 years, his legacy continues to grow. And the reason why it grows is because of, again, the example that he provided to us. And so the CIA, they moved to their next level of tricks, which is to discredit the legacy of people who inspire people to rise up against the interests that they represent. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we're glad that you decided to join us. We give honor to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere and their struggle for just self-determination. And we give honor and justice to our African ancestors who fought for our right to be here today. And our responsibility is simply to continue the mantle of principled struggle that they provided to us. And we have every intention of fulfilling that responsibility. Frantz Fanon was correct. The responsibility of each generation is to either fulfill or betray its mission. And we intend to fulfill ours. So we are thankful to our ancestors. And we start, as we always do, by just simply letting those folks who don't know and reminding those who think they know who we are and what we're doing. Our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored each week, same time, same place, by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, AAPRP. And the APRP is, again, a revolutionary, independent, mass, pan-African political party based in Africa. We are not an electoral politics party, although in many instances, as a tactical response, we can use electoral politics. This is something that people don't understand about revolutionaries. You think that because we say we want revolution that, we just can only define that one way, and that's because you don't understand what revolutionary struggle is about. So that's why we have this program to hopefully help people broaden their perspective of these things. And our objective is Pan-Africanism, which we don't think can be achieved through electoral politics, although we could certainly in some instances use electoral politics to put us in position to build the mass revolutionary capacity we need to wage a worldwide revolution for Pan-Africanism. And that's what we're doing. And we define Pan-Africanism as one unified socialist Africa, and it's an objective. And that objective is laid out in Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, Kwame Nkrumah, uniting all of the revolutionary Pan-African formations on the ground throughout Africa. And if you're someone that says, well, that's not happening, well, you just expose your ignorance right away when you say that, because clearly that work is happening. If you look at what's going on in Africa today, clearly the forces of reaction are working overtime to stop that work. So clearly, obviously, it has to be happening. And Our Ancestors' Voices is hosted each week by me, Ajamu, and Shakura, my biological and ideological daughter. So to get us started, I turn it over to Shakura.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you, comrade. So forgive me, you all. Capitalism is working overtime to make sure that we are not able to get this information out to you. So this is why I am joined in the Zoom twice. So hopefully it won't get too confusing that I'm speaking off of another device, but using the computer to see you all. But yes, we can't be stopped. That's the moral of this. And also, we all know that these devices, we spend so much money on them, but they're not really quality, and that's the whole purpose, right? Propaganda teaches us that if we are to invest in these devices, it's only a matter of time before they'll break down, or in my case, my screen is blurry and I literally can't read what's going on the screen. So thankfully I had another device that I could plug in, but this one, the audio doesn't work. So that's why I'm joined on two different. But as I said, we can't be stopped, and we won't be stopped, and we will persevere forward, and we will keep moving. This information deserves to be in the hands of the masses, and I'm very humbled to be a part of this work study process that organizes with this organization so that we can bring that info to you all. So thank you all for being with us today. We hope you are well in every aspect. I think this is probably one of the most important slides in all the years that you will see a PowerPoint presentation. If I may, I think this is one of the most important slides that you will ever see, because it highlights how all the allied forces are very much connected and dependent on terrorizing people and taking them down, but it also focuses on how there are specific relationships that have been established. So we take, for example, the Central Intelligence Agency, or what we may know if we unfortunately live in the US as the CIA, but we also see the Mossad, which is the Israeli intelligence. And I think it's really important to make that connection that, the US made it clear many, many moons ago that they were pro Zionism, right? And so it would not surprise me to know that the Israeli intelligence has a very deep connection to anything the CIA is doing, and vice versa, right? But we don't stop there. We're also highlighting that the M16, the British intelligence, has done some work in terms of connecting with the CIA and connecting with the Israeli intelligence. And of course, you can't leave out the French, right? The French Secret Service, right? So all of these entities have worked really, really hard to protect and promote capitalism. And they have done so in ways that have murdered people, have harmed people, have caused people to feel unsafe. They've made people sicker in their lives. They have taken away children's abilities to feel safe and to be educated. They have made it impossible for people to have food secure. They've made it impossible for people to be able to trust services like maybe it's economics or education, or maybe it's being able to rely on environmental sources such as agriculture or water. All of these entities have only ever had one intention, and that is to promote capitalism by any means so that they all can profit, right? And so, because of that, we have to understand that the things that they have shared with us, the information we have access to, the documents they've released, the interviews that we can see where these representatives have been in these interviews, none of it can be trusted. None of that information can be trusted, because we also understand that the CIA has been at the front line of many, many assassinations where ancestors of African descent, ancestors of indigenous descent, Asian descent, even our Irish comrades, I'm sure they have terminated some of their lives as well. We can think of any colonized person, and if they were doing work for the people, without a doubt, we know that the CIA had everything to do with their life being taken, right? We know that for a fact. And so I just think it's important to look at that and to really look that through, because why would the Israeli intelligence be any different? Why would Mossad be any different? They're terrorizing people currently. They've been doing it, right? They've done it so well that they've been able to remove Palestine off of all global maps that have been printed for you to purchase and hang up in your wall. So these folks have some serious resources behind their back. And that's the point we're trying to make, is that's why we've got to be equipped to deal with it, which first means understanding that nothing that we receive from them can be trusted. Just understanding that they do not have the best intention at heart, understanding that they don't care at all about people who are not contributing to this overall mission that they have of protecting capitalism and protecting their specific states or nations to do what they need to do. They have every intention of taking things that are not theirs. They have every intention of not playing fair. They have every intention of that. I always think about how, we are such humane people. Colonized people, African people are such humane people. And so I always think about how I handle situations when I'm dealing with things in my life. And a lot of times I will call my dad, of course, to ask his opinion. And I will struggle a little bit because I'm trying to understand how to be more how to be more of a survivor under capitalism that is definitely not a people first system, right? And so my dad is struggling with me a lot, saying, but why would you do that when that's not what you're up against? Like, this system is not going to treat you with the same respect you're treating it. And even as an adult, I struggle with that because I think that trying to hold on to what we all need to hold on to, which is love for humanity, love for other people, not taking on this individualistic perspective that so many of us have been propagandized to accept and to understand, but instead, helping to communicate to not just ourselves, but to anybody else who will listen, that this work that we do, the work that we're involved with, the reason we want to increase our political education, the reason that we're a part of an organization that's working for justice, all of it is based on us helping to build a better world for other people, which means it's bigger than us. And we understand that. And we wouldn't want it any other way. So, because of that, I think that's when it gets really hard to try to not hold on to humanity. It gets really hard to not hold on to collectivist principles. It gets really hard to not be a socialist at heart, because then you find yourself, kind of trapped between how do you survive under an inhumane system, but still hold on to the principles that you're proud to say you have and that help you sleep at night, right? How do you do that? Excuse me, anybody can fall in line and just become, a traitor. Anybody could fall in line and not commit to their values, right? Anybody could do that. Comrade Ajamu says all the time, it's easier to swim with the stream than against it. All the time he says that. So that's what anybody can do. But a real person who is committed to their principles, they're committed to the discipline that requires commitment to principles. They understand that's going to require a special level of how they can show dedication, show humanity in the process, not exclusivity, but humanity in the process for all people, but still make sure to get the revolutionary tactics out so that the masses of people can take those resources and hopefully achieve freedom, hopefully achieve a world without oppression. Whatever the intended goal is, hopefully they can achieve that. So that means we understand that we're not going to be able to play by their rules. We're not going to be able to fall in line. We're not going to be able to work with them. We're not going to be able to do those things, you all, because that was never their intention. And they will shoot first and ask questions later. That's just the bottom line. I mean, we've seen that with Malcolm. We've seen that with King. I shared this clip, this comedian I shared with Comrade Ajamu about how more and more people are starting to either become aware of the fact, specifically that Malcolm and King were killed by federal government, U.S. federal government agents, or maybe they're starting to do more research, but it's not so much a secret anymore. And I think people are slowly starting to talk about it more, to the fact that even comedians are incorporating it within their stand up. So I shared with Comrade Ajamu about a comedian, and then he gave me one back and shared a stand up that Chris Rock did many, many years ago, where he also talked about King and Malcolm. And so the point I'm making is, this is where we start to really understand that if we have comedians like Josh Johnson who are talking about this and Chris Rock who are talking about this, then we know that we need to already look at a spade and call it a spade. We know that it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck. And we also know that because we are doing work to advance the struggles of people everywhere, that's automatically a clue to us for why we would be more of a target. We just need to understand that, you all. We need to understand that. And again, understanding that will probably help you sleep better at night, because if you are committing to your principles and you know that the powers that be want to stop you from doing that, that is all the more reason to keep doing what you're doing, because you understand that you are making a difference. You hope that you can make a difference, but you also understand that people are counting on you. Not everybody is going to join an organization that's working for justice. We wish that you would, but not everybody is going to do that. So for everybody who's not ready to do that, the next best thing is for them to at least support a Pan-Africanist organization that's working for justice. If they're not able to do that, maybe they can donate in some other way. But we all have a responsibility to play with that. And so if you're not willing to join an organization that's working for justice, you can at least support the people who are more likely to be targeted when these entities, CIA, Mossad, even the M16, when they go after these folks trying to take them down. And we can think of so many other examples of where that has come out. But the bottom line is capitalism is not a domestic system. It is an international system that prioritizes private entities over people and humanity. And imperialism is no different when it comes to understanding that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, according to V.L. Lenin, right? And so just understanding that all of these systems are working against the people, you all, the poor people, the colonized people. These systems are not our friends. These governmental agencies are not our friends. They do not want to ensure our safety. They don't care. Meanwhile, our tax dollars are supporting them to be able to terrorize more people. That's the bottom line, and that's the things that we need to accept and be better understanding about. Next slide, please. If we have more of a better understanding of that, then we can start to take on some of the lessons that our ancestors have already left for us, you all. That's why increasing your political education is so important, because we need you all to be ideologically prepared for what's coming. We need you to be mentally prepared. We need you to be physically prepared. We talk all the time about how we encourage you to, incorporate fitness into your life, because you never know. There might come a time where some stuff might pop off and you may need to get out of a situation very quickly. And if you are not with whatever you need to be with to protect yourself, the best thing you can do is relieve yourself from that situation and get to a safe space. So it's not enough for you to be mentally prepared. You have to even be physically prepared, because the terrorists are out there. They are watching you when you go to the grocery store. They're making sure that they're keeping tabs on you. This is what it comes down to. And so, you're going to have to make a decision, because even with you not being in an organization that's working for justice, as I just said, they've had tabs on you since the first time you showed them that you were a potential threat. So they've been monitoring you. They are probably listening to the phone towers. Like, this is what that all means. You know what I mean? I shared with you all a long time ago, but I think it bears repeating. A long time ago, when I first moved to Memphis, I went to this all-night college bar where students would go after hours to get coffee and to study. And I remember checking my phone right before I got out the car, and a new Wi-Fi network popped up on my phone. And so the notification came, and I pulled it down, and it said FBI surveillance. And that was the first time that I had seen that. And I thought to myself, well, I know they know who I am because of the work that my family does. Like, I'm aware of that. I'm not surprised by that. It's interesting that they're here, and it's interesting that they're showing me that they're here. But thankfully, my phone was able to let me know, remind me, hey, you're not alone. Not that I thought that I was, but I mean, the proof is right there, right? And so I think that it's just important to kind of think through about like what that means, and to be always ready. Be always ready. If you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. And so just understanding, you may not know what side you want to be on, but you might not be able to make a decision. You might have to choose very quickly, and you might not have time on your side to make that decision. Depending on who wins next month, the U.S. is going to make it very clear on a lot of things about where they stand, and safety is not going to be the priority. Safety is not going to be the number one concern, especially for colonized people, and especially for folks that are trying to get a change to take place, because they understand that the poor people in this world matter. Meanwhile, the people in office definitely don't agree with you on that. So we're going to have to understand that it's going to be up to us to protect ourselves. And the best way that we can do that is by joining an organization that's working for justice. But as I said, if you're not ready to do that, we're in the month of October. What can you do in the last quarter of the month that could make a difference for a Pan-Africanist organization? Could you donate supplies? Could you donate money? Could you provide ink and paper if they need flyers to be printed? There's got to be something that you can do. something that you can do where you can still balance your mental health and your capacity. We're not asking you to overexert yourself, but something where you can give back and still help progress that organization because you believe in it and because you want the work that they're doing to continue. Thank you, and Ashe.
Ashe, obrigada, asante sana, madasi. Thank you very much. And we want to get straight into the topic at hand as soon as we can get our screen to move here. And thank you for setting us up to be able to do that. And we want to talk by giving you a foundation of the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, and the Cuban Revolution. Because if you don't understand that history, then you won't understand what we're talking about when we talk about how the CIA wants to destroy the legacy of Che Guevara and any other revolutionary committed or related to the Cuban Revolution. So, we have three pictures, and hopefully you're looking at a screen, because we always have pictures here that illustrate what we're talking about and information. So hopefully you can see this, but we have three quick examples. There are a million examples, but we'll start with these three. The top picture is of this lousy, filthy terrorist, Jose Posada Corrales, Jorge Posada Corrales, rather. And this was a person who left Cuba after the Cuban Revolution and went to Florida and spent hundreds of thousands of US tax dollars engaging in sabotage missions against the Cuban Revolution, including shooting down the Cuban airliner in 1977 that killed the entire Cuban football team or soccer team. The youth soccer team, should be said. 73 people were killed in that flight. So, these people are terrorists. And what that should tell you is a couple of things. One, whenever the U.S. funded this piece of slime. So whenever the U.S. tries to say that they're against terrorism, that's a damn lie, obviously. The U.S. government supports terrorist activity all over the planet Earth. They always have, and they always will. And so that's one thing. The other thing is that these people are not interested in any type of democracy in Cuba. The Cuban Revolution is the best example of democracy that island nation has ever had. What they're interested in is regaining power, and returning Cuba to being a playground for capitalist interests in the Caribbean, just like the Virgin Islands, Jamaica, Puerto Rico. That's what they want Cuba to. Cuba used to be just like all those countries, and they wanted to go back to that. And so that's why they arm and support these terrorists. And then in the middle picture, you have Radio Marti, which is one of the many propaganda mechanisms funded in large part by the Central Intelligence Agency to spread lies and propaganda to the Cuban people about the Cuban Revolution. And they have no qualms about lying to people. All you have to do, you can listen to Radio Marti in the US. You should listen to them. Don't argue, and you didn't even know what Radio Marti was before I just mentioned it. Don't argue. Do the work. Understand what they're saying. Listen to Voice of America. Listen to all of these capitalist propaganda organs. Radio Free Cuba. Listen to them and understand what they're talking about. They're talking about making people like Jorge Posada Corrales look like heroes and people like Che Guevara look like villains without providing you a shred of evidence. I mean, just scum, the lowest sewer water on the planet Earth. And then below that, the $2 million reward that the FBI, CIA, same thing, in the APRP, we say the FBI and the CIA ain't nothing but the KKK. We've been saying that for 40 years. So in that picture, they show you where Asada Shakur, they issued the $2 million bounty on her head. She's been protected by the Cuban Revolution for 40 years now. And they don't want her to be free in Cuba because it's a glaring example that they are not impenetrable, that they cannot be defeated. And so that's the why they are so interested in offering this bounty currently on a 70-something-year-old woman. This is why, I mean, it makes no logical sense, but nothing these people do is logical because their interests are tied to holding the entire planet hostage. So this is what the CIA is. Just a couple of quick examples. We could go on all day telling you how criminal they are in their operations. But the point is, if you go back to 1948, that was the year the CIA was created. The CIA has been a chief terrorist organization on the planet Earth. And the only reason why we say a chief is because we already mentioned the other imperialist intelligence agencies, the Israeli Mossad, the British M16, French Secret Service, all of these, Canadian, Australian, all of these capitalist, imperialist, terrorist organizations. The CIA is the main one, but their primary function is to do anything. These people don't operate based on morality. Anything that preserves the interests of the international capitalist imperialist system is okay to do. So, assassination, lying about people, putting people in prison who have done nothing illegal, all of these things are within their purview, and these are the things they do. And if you go to the brutal Batista regime, Fulgencio Batista was the US-backed dictator in Cuba in the 50s who allowed Cuba to be basically a playground run by the mafia, the Italian mafia, the Copacabana Hotel, Ricky Ricardo, all that bullshit. That's what they did. And as long as they did that, the CIA had no problem with them subjugating and oppressing the masses of Cuban people, just like they don't have any problem with them doing that in any other part of the world. But the Cuban people rose up and waged a successful revolution, throwing Batista out of Cuba and preventing U.S. capitalist interests from running amok in Cuba as they had done for decades before 1959. And so this is why the CIA has been on a path since 1959 to completely sabotage the Cuban Revolution. So once the Cuban Revolution removed Batista and created a socialist, building socialist revolution 90 miles from the US, this marked the territory for the CIA to engage in its bag of illegal tricks, sabotage, murder, destruction, to do anything they could to attempt to sabotage the Cuban Revolution. Because socialism 90 miles from the US means that you have access to it. And a lot of people here in the US are traveling to Cuba. They're refusing to listen to the propaganda. They're finding out on their own that everything they're telling you, it's lies. There aren't people starving. In fact, it's one of the few places in the Caribbean where people are not starving. You go to all these capitalist countries in the Caribbean, you'll see starvation. Go to Haiti, you'll see plenty of starvation. Go to Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, you'll see plenty of starvation in those places, but you won't see it in Cuba. So this is the type of thing they don't want you to see. You'll see how much healthier the people look. Even compared to the people in the US, the people in Cuba look so much healthier because healthcare is quality and it's free. This is the byproduct of a socialist revolution. So people don't have to be afraid to go to the doctor because they can't afford it. So this is the stuff they don't want you to see. And most of you have no desire to see it. And all you want to do is watch them tell you what you're supposed to think. And this is how they remain in power. This is how they're able to continue to do the things that they do. As it relates to Ernesto Che Guevara and the Cuban Revolution, a couple of things about Che, a couple of honest assessments about Che Guevara. And I love when people try to argue with me about Che Guevara because I've spent, the way that I approach this work is I sought role models, but I don't see role models the way a lot of you see role models. To me, the definition of a role model is looking at them in their entirety as a human being, not just looking at them in an idealistic sense and not critically analyzing them, but looking at them in their entirety, seeing their faults, seeing their errors, and using that to try to figure out how I can avoid making those same mistakes while uplifting the positive attributes that they all have. So when you talk about, I'm a man, if you talk about men, I have plenty of women uh, that are role models for me as well. Uh, Asada Shakur, Teodora Gomez, Carmen Bieta, uh, uh, um, I could go on and on and on and on. Uh, Amelia Kamara, on and on. But when we talk about dudes that are role models for me, Che Guevara is at the top of the list, along with Malcolm X, along with Kwame Nkrumah, along with Huey P. Newton, people like that. But again, I don't look at them with rose-colored glasses. I give very honest and sober assessments of the errors that I think they made. I've written extensively about all of them, so it's documented. So you can't lie and say, "Well, he don't make no honor. You're a damn idiot if you do that," because all the things that I've written about them is documented. All you got to do is spend 5 minutes doing something that most of us have an intense fear of, reading that dirty four-letter word read, and you can see those assessments. But for here, we'll just talk briefly about Che. And one of the things is, again, honest revolutionaries always admit errors. We're our only interest is moving forward in the revolutionary process. So we have to admit weaknesses and errors. We don't try to pretend that they don't exist. And one of those honest assessments is that once the Cuban Revolution triumphed, Che Guevara uh, became the Minister of Finance, meaning that he was the officer in the Cuban Revolution who was situated with attempting to help guide the reorganization of Cuba's socialist economy. And honestly, Che was really not suited for this. He wasn't a person who had a strong background in world economics. He didn't have a background in trade. Of course, when you have revolutions, typically you're not going to have people that have, because you're overturning the people who will monopolize that experience. So it's not that, but he just was, a lot of the decisions that he ended up making that he wanted to make in the best interest of the Cuban Revolution were actually not suited to do that. So that's just an honest assessment. He probably should have never been in that role. He was a soldier in the truest sense, which means soldiers, their training is to kill the enemy. So there's oftentimes errors when you have people with soldier mentalities in these government leadership positions. But one of those things that I don't think should be blamed on Che Guevara, that the CIA wants to make you think was Che Guevara's fault, was the La Habana trials in 1959 and 1960 in Cuba. And if you don't know what the La Habana trials are, but you're parroting this line that Che Guevara was a murderer, this right-wing CIA line that he was a murderer, and you don't know what the La Habana trials are, you're a damn fool. You don't know what you're talking about. You're serving as a propaganda arm for the CIA. Whether you mean to do that or not, that's exactly what you're doing. The La Habana trials happened because after the Cuban Revolution triumphed, in the military sense, on January 1st, 1959, the people of Cuba wanted these traitors from the Batista regime who had engaged in out and out terror against the Cuban people for years to be punished. The Cuban people wanted these people to be punished. And the people were not willing to wait for this to happen. They went out in the street and grabbed these Batista officials, and they began killing them and punishing them for the terror these people had meted out against the people of Cuba. And so the Cuban Revolution created the La Habana trials to bring some sense of order to this process, so it wasn't just vigilante justice. And they appointed Che Guevara, as he then became the Minister of Interior. The Minister of Finance position didn't work out, as I mentioned. He became the Minister of Interior. And part of his responsibilities as the Minister of Interior was to oversee these trials. And so he went and they had these trials, and there were thousands of people who were tried, and many of them were summarily executed once they were found guilty. And there were a number of them who probably the evidence was rushed. They probably were killed and they shouldn't have been executed. And the Cuban Revolution has apologized for that. There's not a single country on earth that hasn't made those types of errors. And certainly the United Snakes of America is in no moral position, incarcerating the highest percentage of people outside of China on the planet Earth. And a large percentage, some of the people who research this kind of thing, estimating that up to 50% of the people incarcerated in this country shouldn't be. This country is in no position to take a moral platitude high stance against Cuba. I mean, that's laughable. That's not serious at all. But the Cuban Revolution took responsibility for that, did the best they could to compensate the families. Whereas what you can't even, that's not even a discussion in this country. So this country, but then the reason why I'm comparing, it's not a whataboutism. It's the US government that's making sure you see this narrative that Che Guevara and the Cuban Revolution murdered people. There were no murders. It was an effort of a young country, a country that was only not even a year old, to bring justice to people who had committed clear acts of terrorism against the people of Cuba. And there were some errors made, but that does not make Che Guevara or anybody else a murderer. What that does is it shows the Cuban Revolution was committed to bringing about justice for those who deserved it. But I think the largest error that Che Guevara made, that's been made from a lot of people who followed this example, was his foco theory, FOCO, focal theory. And what this theory entailed was Che's belief that you could organize a guerrilla expedition, you could organize a military uprising. And once the people saw this military uprising, they would be motivated to start a political revolution in a country. And this was a very unfortunate theory that Che held that led to his death, because he went to Bolivia in 1965-66 with this focal theory and started this military expedition. And from the moment that he attempted to do this, he and Fidel and the leaders of the Cuban Revolution, and they met with the leaders of the Bolivian Communist Party, including the chair, the Secretary General, a man by the name of Mario Manjo. And Mario Manjo, even though he had no previous military experience, made it clear to Che that Mario, would have to be the leader of this military expedition. And if he was not the leader, even though he didn't have the experience, whereas Che Guevara had fought in military wars for revolution at that point in two different countries, in Cuba and the Congo in Central Africa. But Manjo, not respecting that, said that the the Bolivian Communist Party would not support this military expedition. And this force of soldiers, primarily Cubans, they had some Bolivians there, like the Perito brothers, Inti and Chico Perito, who were members of the Communist Party of Bolivia, who were part of Che's military expedition in Bolivia, but they did not have the support of the people, and they were not successful in winning that support. And this led to them being isolated and eventually Che captured and assassinated. Revolutions require the masses of people. They cannot be started by 10, 11 people. And if you say, well, the Cuban Revolution started with 11 people, yeah, the military part did start with 11 people, and Che was a part of that. But that was not all they had. They had a large and robust urban uprising mechanism in Cuba, because the landing of the Grandma in 1958 was not the beginning of the Cuban Revolution. There was the raid on the Moncada garrison in 1953, which is what the July 26th movement, every year, July 26th is a huge holiday in Cuba. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. If you're going to argue about the Cuban Revolution, you need to know your shit. Otherwise, shut up and stop arguing about it. July 26th is a big holiday in Cuba. I'm telling you this. I don't have any notes. I've studied all this. Damn it. So you got to do the same thing if you're going to argue about it. Otherwise, shut up. You're just polluting the air if you don't know what you're talking about. So the July 26th movement was active in Cuba. By the time the Grandma landed, they were in place, and there were people who led that movement. Vilma Espin, for example, the wife of Raul Castro. She just made her physical transition a couple of years ago. Raul, of course, is still alive in Cuba and among the leadership of the Cuban Revolution. Fidel's younger brother was a leader. Frank Paz, Massetti, these were all the leaders of the Cuban urban resistance. They organized the strikes, you all, the student strikes in Cuba. They organized the worker strikes. This is what revolution looks like, plus the military aspect. That did not exist in Bolivia. You just had the military uprising of a couple of dozen combatants led by Che Guevara. The focal theory is an error, it's a mistake. And that was an error that Che made. And another thing that I've always done in my assessment of these leaders is I've looked at how they interacted with their families, because true revolutionaries cannot separate your revolutionary work from your personal life. It has to be the same thing. Anybody talking about, I'm a revolutionary, but I got a personal life, I can do whatever I want in a person, that's not a revolutionary. That's a pimp. That's a hustler. It's all the same thing. You cannot express values in your revolutionary life and then in your personal life have a partner that you beat or don't, are not honestly engaged in a healthy relationship with, don't take care of your produce children, but don't take care of them. That's not a revolutionary. I don't care what the hell you do on a political level. So I wanted to make sure that, I had a proper assessment of this. And I will say that all of these men that I mentioned, none of them were good with the women that they were engaged with. Che was not the best with the two women that he had children with. Kwame Nkrumah was not the best. Malcolm X was not the best. And I know all these histories that I'm talking about. Huey P. Newton was a disaster when it came to relationships. So not to put them down or take anything away from what they contributed, because they all contributed a great deal, but it is for me, and it should be for you, to learn from their errors so that we don't repeat them. To learn from their errors. I don't know what the hell could happen to me. But that's why, unlike Malcolm, I've organized my little personal affairs so that if something happens to me, whether it's by my own making or whether it's somebody else, then my family is protected and taken care of. And these are some of the things I've learned. And I'm grateful to the ancestors for teaching me that. But we got to understand the spirit of Che Guevara. Because you can't, Secretary said, the only people that don't make errors are people that don't do a damn thing. He didn't say damn, I threw that in there because I think it's important to underline that. A lot of people, I don't make any, people, I've never been arrested. I've never had handcuffs on. I've never been fired from a job. I'm like, somebody was saying that around me. And I'm like, I don't even want to be around you. Because what you're telling me is that you don't do a damn thing for justice. All you do is just be a coward and do everything you can to make sure you don't have any difficulties in your life. I don't respect you. Anybody, if you gotta have had some handcuffs on you. I've had them on me, God damn it. You gotta have been fired from jobs. I've been fired from multiple jobs. I mean, what the hell kind of person in a backward cesspool empire brags about being the model citizen in the empire? So of course Che Guevara made errors. Of course he did. And that's the picture on the screen. It's a picture of Che in Bolivia, or I'm sorry, in the Congo, where in 1965, when he was there under the pseudonym Tatu, which, if you know Swahili, knows that's number 2 in Swahili, with the combatants from the National Congolese movement. And they were attempting to overthrow the CIA-backed forces in the Congo. And despite the CIA's best efforts, Che's spirit lives today in Cuba, all over so-called, I say that underlined, Latin America, all over Africa for sure. And with all African revolutionaries, the Black Panther Party moderned their initial ideological approach from Che Guevara's writings on guerrilla warfare. So this man is ingrained in the hearts and minds of revolutionaries, and it's because of his spirit. Che was an idealist. And I understand that because I'm an idealist. And what an idealist means is that you have a vision for what you think the world should be. You're not derailed by the backwardness of the world today. The backwardness of the world today does nothing to curtail your vision of what the world could and should be. That's an idealist. So a lot of you know people that aren't idealists, they're like, well, we ain't gonna never be able to organize together. We ain't gonna. That's the opposite of me. I don't, people that talk like that, I'm disengaged. I don't want to talk to nobody like that because you wasted my time and energy. I'm an idealist. Che was an idealist. He wanted justice for humanity. He was never concerned about money and prestige. And even his greatest enemies acknowledged that about him. And I'll give you a great example. There's a book that I just read. Sorry, I have to grab it here. But there's a book that I just read. You should read it. It's called Trained to Kill: The Inside Story of CIA Plots Against Castro, Kennedy, and Che. And it's by the former CIA asset Antonio Vecina, Vecina. And what this piece of scum wrote about, and it's important to read the perspective of the enemy, because how are you going to understand things if you only understand what you understand and agree with? So I often read books from people I don't agree with. That's how I'm such a strong critical thinker. So this piece of scum he had 2 meetings with Che Guevara. He was undercover. And all he could do is talk about how much he respected him, how, Che wasn't stealing any money. I mean, this guy he just had something personal against Fidel Castro. But he talked about Che Guevara, and he talked about how, the man, his clothes were raggedy. He wasn't doing anything to improve his individual position. He was only concerned about bringing about justice the way he saw it. And this man, even though this man wouldn't know justice if it slapped the hell out of him, he had to respect Che for that. And you need to respect him for that. Because Che was the type of person that threw himself into action, whether he was ready for not. Fidel Castro, when Che was assassinated, said that, it wasn't a surprise because he was always trying to argue with his friend not to be in the front of the battle. How many military commanders run out front? Che Guevara was famous for doing that when the bullets were flying. He spent 2 weeks in Ghana visiting with Kwame Nkrumah in 1965. And when he left, Nkrumah wrote that that man is going to lose his life on the battlefield, because he knew from spending 2 weeks with Che Guevara that this dude cares about principle. He doesn't care about living. He cares about doing what's right. And so he knew that. So this is the type of man is that obviously somebody like that is a clear threat to the CIA and what they represent. And whether you talk about the Cuban Revolution, the Congo, the direction of Cuba's relationship in China, USSR, Bolivia, I wish we had more time to go deeper into that. But Che was committed to revolution, and he wanted to. Another CIA lie is that Fidel Castro set him up for murder. That's a damn lie. Che saw the Soviet Union correctly as faking revolution. He saw China as more willing to engage in revolutionary struggle. And so he advocated in the early 60s that Cuba align itself with China and not the Soviet Union. And as things began to play out, this clearly began to be a route that would not benefit what Cuba needed at that time in the early 1960s. And so Che, recognizing this and being a man of principle, saw that the best thing for the Cuban Revolution was for him to remove himself from it. And that's the reason why he went to the Congo and Bolivia. If you study it, Fidel Castro did everything he could to talk Che out of going into Bolivia. He did not think that that was a winnable situation in Bolivia. And when it was clear that Che was not going to listen, the Cuban Revolution behind Fidel Castro did everything they could to support Che in Bolivia. That's documented. Don't come to me with that nonsense, because I can show you how you don't know what the hell you're talking about. That's documented. And then, of course, Che's contribution to Africa is without question. We've talked about it so much, but we have to continue to talk about it because our enemies say so many counter things, and most of us are conditioned to listen to them. So we have to say even more. So what was Che's contribution to Africa? Well, first, let's start with Robert Williams, who was a leader of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, in North Carolina, Monroe, North Carolina. And Robert Williams was hit. Robert Williams advocated that we should engage in self-defense, that we should not be turning the other cheek. When these crackers hit us, we should knock the hell out of them. And we should learn how to shoot, and we should start shooting back at the Klan. And so he was at odds with the NAACP national leadership, Roy Wilkins, and those types of people. And so Robert Williams was hit with a false kidnapping charge. And to escape these false charges, because he knew they were trying to get him, he and his wife, Mabel Williams, they fled to Cuba in the early 60s and befriended Che Guevara. And Che Guevara at that time, as I just mentioned, was steadily advancing Cuba's need to become more closely aligned with China and less close with the Soviet Union. And they gave Robert Williams a radio program and all these things. But when the change began to happen that I just mentioned, that was the reason why Che left, not because he didn't have continued support for the Cuban Revolution, but because he didn't want to stand in the way of it, of what the majority of people in the Cuban Revolution, the direction they felt they needed to go. And Robert Williams also left Cuba and went to China and continued to have a radio program there. But my point is that starting with that, Che Guevara helping Robert Williams get settled in China helped create the legacy that the Cuban Revolution has had, from Robert Williams to Eldridge Cleaver to Huey P. Newton to Assata Shakur and many, many, many others, Bill Brent, many others, of allowing African revolutionaries from the U.S. to seek safety and asylum in Cuba. And I'm saying Che was a big part of that. And of course, going to the Congo when nobody else did and helping our people in the Congo who were assisted, the forces of reaction in the Congo were assisted by the CIA. They were the ones who backed Mobutu. His name then was Joseph Desiree Mobutu, and he changed it to Mobutu Sese Seko. He was the man who the CIA chose as their brutal dictator to run the revolutionaries out of the Congo, and they armed him and gave him plenty of money to do that, so much so that he became, for a while, the richest man in Africa, and all he was a junior military officer. So clearly that money came from the corruption. They were backed by the apartheid state of South Africa, the Zionist state of Israel. All of them were united to run the revolutionaries out of the Congo. And Cuba sent 100 combatants led by Che Guevara there to fight back against him. They had white mercenaries there, racist white mercenaries from apartheid South Africa, led by this piece of human filth, Michael Moore, M-O-A-R-E. Look him up. It was a mercenary, a white mercenary that made his money killing African revolutionaries in Africa. And even Michael Moore said that the stiffest resistance they encountered in the Congo were the forces trained and led by Che Guevara. And of course, Che and the National Congolese movement were not successful in the Congo, but the relationship of the Cuban Revolution in Africa was established by Che's work in the Congo and his subsequent work when he went to Tanzania and spent several months reaffirming relationships. And I actually went to the the Cuban embassy with other AAPRP comrades in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania in 2016, and the Cuban ambassador showed us where Che Guevara lived in the embassy and nurtured those relationships with liberation movements in Africa throughout the African continent. And even though Che left Tanzania in 1965 to prepare for his ill-fated activity in Bolivia, those relationships led to people like Victor Drake Cruz becoming a military advisor from Cuba in Africa that helped in Guinea-Bissau's anti-colonial war against Portugal, and certainly in Mozambique's anti-colonial war against Portugal and Angola's anti-colonial war against Portugal. And this all led to Cuba sending 500,000 troops within a 10-year period in the 80s and 90s to Southern Africa to fight against all these racists and reactionaries and their Negro puppet Mobutu. And without those Cuban troops, which never would have been there, without the initial sacrifice of Ernesto Che Guevara, all of Southern Africa today would be under racist apartheid rule, anti-African apartheid rule, white supremacist apartheid rule. So go to goddamn hell if you tell us we should not honor Che Guevara. To hell with you. You haven't lifted a finger to help African people nowhere on earth. Nowhere on earth. And we're supposed to listen to you because he said the N-word when he was 22 years old. Because that's what they used to justify saying he was racist. He said the N-word when he was 22 years old. You said the N-word 5 goddamn minutes ago. So who the hell are you saying the N-word 5 minutes ago, having done zero for the African masses to criticize this man who put his life on the line to try to fight for justice for our people and all of humanity? We hope it gives you a goddamn seizure and heart attack when we say it. We love Ernesto Che Guevara, and we live our life to emulate his example as long as we have breath on the planet Earth. We thank you for joining us, and we invite you back next week, Sunday, October 13th, from 4 to 5 p.m. We will be talking about the uprisings happening in Nigeria right now. So we want to invite you back so you can get an update on that. The upper left QR code, please go there to find out about other AAPRP programs. The Forward Ever Shop, buy our clothes, make orders, order Revolutionary African clothing, tell others about it. Please, Hood Communists, tell others about it. Go there, read the articles, Revolutionary Pan-African Literature, join the AAPRP, aaprp-intl.org, and or donate to the AAPRP, Venmo at a-APRP, or PayPal at AAPRP, no dashes, and then contribute to one of our on-the-ground programs in Africa and Burkina Faso, Burkina Books, the QR code in the lower right, you can do that. We encourage you to do that, please. And we ask you to support my book. It's only $8 US, a guide for organizing defense against white supremacist, patriarchal, and fascist violence, a guide for organizing defense against white supremacist, patriarchal, and fascist violence. Ajamu Umi, the author, you can look it up. It's only available on Amazon. They do the printing, they do the shipping. I don't have to take a nickel. I don't need any lectures about Amazon. If you have a way for me to do that, I went to several African publishers. They didn't have the capacity to do it. So we're trying to make Revolutionary Struggle. We use all the proceeds. It's not much, selling a book for only $8, but we use all the proceeds to buy equipment, to do trainings, travel to do trainings for anti-fascism. What is that? That's when we train our people and all peace and justice loving communities to defend themselves against white supremacist mobs, racist mobs, fascist mobs, patriarchal mobs, homophobic mobs, whatever the hell they are. We're teaching people how to stand up and defend themselves against those groupings. You do not want to be walking down the street and come in contact with these people. They have no morality. You're pleased for justice. You're pleased for humanity. You're pleased to Jesus. They don't give a damn about any of that. You will end up lucky if you're in the hospital, if not just dead. Well, we don't want it to come to that, because the solution is not calling 911. That'll probably get you dead or in prison faster. Instead, we have to learn how to defend ourselves as communities. And that's part of the work that I'm committed to. And the way I finance that is through the book. So if you can help out by buying copies of the book, it's greatly appreciated. A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. If you can tell others and buy books, if you can do study groups with the books, if you can get bookstores to put the books in their bookstores. All of this helps with this work, you all. So please do that. If you're not in an organization, those kind of things, that's the least thing you can do. So please do that. Please be strong. Please join an organization working for humanity. Forward ever, backwards never. Always stay clever in any endeavor. Enjoy the rest of your day.